Vergnügen, dass wir heute Herrn Dr. Reuven Kiperwasser als Gast unter uns haben für eine Alexander von Humboldt-Vorlesung. Herr Dr. Kiperwasser ist nicht zum ersten Mal hier in Halle. Ich habe erfahren, dass er vor ungefähr einem Jahrzehnt schon mal hier Halle besucht hat und in der Judaistik einen Vortrag gehalten hat. Wir sind sehr erfreut, dass er heute zu einem Thema, das jüdisch-christliche Beziehungen betrifft, sprechen wird und bei uns am Seminar Christlicher Orient und Byzanz zu Gast ist. Herr Dr. Kiperwasser war zunächst von 82 bis 88 als Arzt an der Staatlichen Universität für Medizin und Pharmazie in Chișinău, der Hauptstadt der Republik Moldau, tätig. Dann hat er sich aber etwas umorientiert und hat von 1994 bis 2005 Talmud studiert an der Talmud-Fakultät der Bar-Ilan-Universität in Ramat Gan in Israel. Und 2005 hat er dort auch mit einer Arbeit zur Formation und Redaktion der Midrashim zu Kohelet promoviert. Er war als Dozent für rabbinische Literatur an verschiedenen Orten tätig, unter anderem Ramat Gan in Jerusalem und auch in Moskau. Zurzeit ist er als Wissenschaftler an der Ariel University in Israel sowie am Melton Center for Jewish Education an der Hebrew University tätig und, wie ich gerade auch erfahren habe, an der Katholischen Universität in Jerusalem. Seine Forschungstätigkeiten wurden an zahlreichen Institutionen ausgeführt und von vielen interessierten Geldgebern unterstützt. Er war Gastwissenschaftler am Orientalischen Institut der Staatlichen Universität in Moskau sowie am Philosophischen Institut der Staatlichen Universität in St. Petersburg. Er war 2013 bis 2014 als Gastwissenschaftler am Europäischen Institut für jüdische Studien in Schweden tätig, speziell in Stockholm. Ein Jahr später war er Fellow am Jean and Samuel Frankel Center for Judaic Studies an der University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in den Vereinigten Staaten. In Deutschland war er gleich an 2 Instituten schon als Gastwissenschaftler tätig. Zum einen forschte er mehrmals als Alexander von Humboldt Fellow am Institut für jüdische Studien an der Freien Universität in Berlin. Und er war auch im Jahr 2016 in Hamburg eine Zeit lang als Gastwissenschaftler am Maimonides Center for Advanced Studies an der Uni Hamburg tätig. Aktuell, wie ich erfahren habe, hat er in Southampton und in Salzburg Forschungsaufenthalte verbringen können. Seine Forschungsschwerpunkte liegen im Bereich der rabbinischen Literatur, der iranischen Studien bzw. der Beschäftigung mit persischer Literatur als Schnittstelle für rabbinische Themen. Was mich sehr interessiert ist, dass er im Bereich der syrischen Patristik und syrischen Kirchenväterliteratur sehr aktiv tätig ist. Er erforscht natürlich sehr allgemein und breit die spätantike jüdische Tradition und man könnte ihn auch als jemanden betrachten, der im Bereich der transkulturalen Studien tätig ist. Vielleicht gibt es da noch eine Möglichkeit, ein bisschen weiter sich darüber auszutauschen. Zahlreiche Publikationen sind erschienen, beziehungsweise sind noch im Erscheinen betreffend. Eine kritische Ausgabe und Kommentar zu Kohelet Rabbah wird wohl bald erscheinen. Er hat ein Buch veröffentlicht mit dem Titel Going West, The Migrating Persona in Rabbinic Narratives und hat schon 2012 ein Buch auf Russisch publiziert zu den Metamorphosen der Themen Liebe und Tod in rabbinischen Texten. Es kommen noch zahlreiche lange Listen von Artikeln und edierten Büchern dazu. Ich will Sie nicht langweilen mit weiteren Angaben, aber ich wollte ausreichend Platz geben, um darzustellen, was für ein weit gereister, in sehr vielen Netzwerken sich umtuender Wissenschaftler uns hier beehrt. Ein sehr breites Spektrum an Themen, mit denen er sich beschäftigt. Und ich frage mich jetzt schon so 2-3 Wochen, was denn in der Schachtel ist, die im Titel angesprochen ist. Wir hören jetzt mit Spannung, was Sie dazu zu sagen haben. What is hidden in the small box? Narratives of late antique Roman Palestine in Kohelet Rabbah und John Moschos' Spiritual Meadow. Herzlich willkommen.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Maybe I have to apologize that I will not make any attempt to speak German, but maybe next time, because you see, I'm from the family of Yiddish-speaking people, and when I'm trying to speak German, it goes only Yiddish, and then it's very, very funny for your people. So let us go to this text in a vulgar Latin of academic world. I mean, we will talk in bad English, because it's a vulgar Latin of the modern world. So what I want to present here is a comparative reading of two stories, of two narrative traditions from, as I wrote here, Kohelet Rabbah, and actually it's a little bit badly formulated, because I haven't translated the name of the rabbinic work, and Kohelet Rabbah is a rabbinic anthology on Ecclesiastes, what you call in German der Prediger, and it's a big work consisted from stories and exegetic fragments, exegetic pericopeia. And this work was composed in the land of Israel, in Roman Palestine. The majority of these traditions were composed in the 5th and 6th century, but the final edition probably happened not before the 7th century. The second narrative tradition that I want to compare is actually also composed in land of Israel, and it's composed in the Greek language. The book named in the Greek Leimonarium, people usually know is about with his Latin title given by translator, by Renaissance translator Pratum Spirituale, or in English translation, as it's written here, a Spiritual Meadow. This book was composed in land of Israel in the 7th century. It means we have two contemporary literary traditions by a monk, by a certain monk named John Moschos, who was actually not Greek-speaking originally person. He was probably from Damascus, and probably I will introduce him with the good help of Chadwick about this book. Written in the 2nd or 3rd decade of 7th century, it records anecdotes from monasteries of Palestine and Egypt related to John Moschos as he traveled about with his friend Sophronius in search of education and unusual. This is a funny point of this book. The stories in this book is a little bit didactic, but mostly entertaining, mostly recording of unusual things, written in a rather very simple Greek, which makes this book easy to reader, but sometimes some expressions and words, as we will see here, not completely, but somehow inexplicable. So, what I want to compare is two similar traditions that are quite parallel traditions, and I want to, for these people that will live in the middle, I don't want to claim here, it's usually, no, please, if you want to live in the middle, feel free, don't hesitate, but if somebody will live before the end, I want to say in the beginning that I'm not claiming a direct relationship between these two books. Rabbis probably were unable to read this book, and the book actually, these Greek books written for their by monks for their own brethren, they were not read by big number of readers. The people who were able to read them were quite a few, but somehow, so I don't want to claim that rabbis read Lemonarium, and of course I don't want to claim that monks read Ecclesiastes Rabbah, Kohelet Rabbah, but I want to claim about the shared narrative milieu of these narrators, and actually I want to ponder of the meaning of this shared milieu, what happened in it. Maybe I have to introduce actually this area of studies. I mean, a question of relationship between Christian authors and Talmudic rabbis, and I'm not an inventor of this area, like people from Wissenschaft des Judentums, as Samuel Kraus and Ginsburg asked these questions, and they dealt with certain books, like from some, but usually Lemonarium, the book of John Moschos, is somehow underestimated book. It's somehow on the margins of Greek patristics, and actually nobody mentioned, almost nobody, except one enlightening study of Hillel Neumann, nobody mentioned the parallels between these two books, and they are numerous, which I brought only two of them because of the proximity of in the space and time of these two books. So now we're going to the small box. I'm not sure that this box is small enough, but and actually these books, but I like to bring this because it's full with books or something like that, because actually the main desire of this study is to investigate what is hidden in a small box of short elliptic rabbinic or Christian story. That's a box of the story, and how we will see further in the first of the stories which we will read, the box appears. And let us actually not let us to cut short this introduction and to go to the stories, and then we will ask the questions, what actually this comparative study could teach us. So we're going to Kohelet Rabbah, Ecclesiastes Rabbah, and this is a famous text, maybe mostly famous text from Ecclesiastes, no? The Song of Times. Times for that, times for that, yeah? A time to seek, and it begins from typical rabbinic exegesis, when they dividing the verse on small pieces and are asking what actually hidden here. A time to seek in a time of peace, a time to lose in a time of war, a time to keep in a time of sustainment, and time to cast away in troubled times. Nothing resembles boxes, and this is actually the mainstream of this exegesis. The Song of Times is about the peace and war. The negative are about the war, the positive things are about the peace. Now came the story. And the story, as I'm a little bit, I will say it again, but if somebody will leave, I will say they already here. The story is not really fitting the exegetic context. And we have asked why. A story. There was a merchant who was going to sail on the sea, he and his son. There was him a box, kubin, or kobion, I want to say. And this is one and only appearance of this word in all the corpus of rabbinic literature. And you will understand further why I am accentuating on that. A box, here is a box, with denarii. He gave it to them, counted, to keep, this is a wrong reading, scribe error, in the dark, be'afela, and this is my correction, in the ship, be'ilfa. Ilfa, it's a Greek word for the ship, which was used in all these languages, Semitic and other of Mediterranean, because Greeks, they were inventor of navigations. He heard the voices of the sailors say, when entered the sea, lepilgos, which also is the Greek word, we killed them and throw them into the sea, and we take the treasure of dinars, how to say it, from him. What did this man do? He made himself angry at his son and took the money and threw them into the sea. On entering the city, he complained about this to the proconsul Antipota in Aramaic of Caesarea, and the proconsul brought them into the prison, the sailors, and they were judged and obliged to give him back the property of dinars. They said to him, where did you learn this law to find us guilty? These criminals said to him. He said, and from Solomon, the king of Israel, it is written, and a time to cast away. There is times where you have to cast away your money in the way. So this is a very short story, very small box of this story, and let us summarize it briefly. So story brought to this verse of Ecclesiastes from Kohelet. But actually, we will see that it's not fully fitting this story. In this story, the trader embarks on the sea journey, carrying with him a small box named Kobion, which contains a considerable number of gold coins. He hears the talk of sailors who are plotting to kill him and his son once the ship entered the highest sea, the Pilgos, and take possession of the money. In order to avert this scenario, father and son pretend to quarrel, after which the merchant throws the box into the sea and survives. Upon arrival to Caesarea, which was the center of Roman life of the Roman Palestine, he complains to the proconsul himself, and this high official demands the sailor cover the merchant loss. Alive and newly wealthy, the merchant explains that he found a blueprint for this clever plan in the words of Kohelet. It is good to cast away, namely to lose wealth in troubled times, after which you can be rewarded again. The link to the verse appears artificial, and the end of this story, maybe you will think it differently, but it's not particularly convincing. Of course, storytellers, this sea journey, it's a very favorite plot of the narrators, Christian and Jewish, of the late antiquity. And some of them are stemming from this Jonah narrative, because it's a very important biblical story, and the later narrators were influenced by that. Some of them were influenced by Greek-Roman topos of story, from the Dionysius to Odysseus, people going to the sea. Sea is an important place of important semiotic traffic. But this is not this story. It's not a heroic story. It's more a picaresque story. Why actually this story was brought here? And I want to explain it by different meanings. But let us put some attention on that, on the wording of this story. On this above mentioned word kubin, and which appears the first time in the rabbinic literature, and there are some lacunas of this plot that I will explain further. And maybe for understanding these peculiarities of this story, maybe we will go directly to his Greek parallel, and now we're reading the story from John Moschos, from his Lemonarium. This one of the fathers, and actually it's interesting, both of these stories which we will read has interesting attributions. Who is the father? It's not really clear who is this elder who taught him, and actually what is the religious meaning of this story, but let us see. One of the fathers said, there was a jeweler of the kind known of gem engraver. He had some valuable stones and pearls when he went abroad a ship together with his servants. And the Greek word is paidon, which actually, this is translation of worldly, but it could be not servant, it could be also the sons as in our story, in the rabbinic story. It was his intention to go to business elsewhere. But divine providence, it happened that he became fond of crewman who was detailed to wait upon him. This servant slept at his side and ate some food he ate. One day the servant overheard the sailors whispering to each other and determining among themselves to throw the gem engraver into the sea to get their hands on the stones he had with him. It was a very disturbed servant who went in to wait on the good man. "Why you so gloomy today, boy?" asked the man. But other kept his own counsel and said nothing. He asked him again, "I'm skipping." And the servant broke into tears and sobbed out that the sailor was planning to do this and to decide among themselves to do this and that to the jeweler, who asked, "Is this really so?" "Yes," was the reply. "That is what they have decided among themselves to do to you." You can see that plot is much more detailed, and some unexplained things like how the sailor knew about the plot against him explained here. Then the jeweler called his son and said to him, "Whatever I tell you to do, do it. Once it without arguing." Then he unfolded a linen cloth and said to him, please put your attention to this word, "Bring the inlaid chest, ferreted ta mon zikia," and they brought him to them. He opened them and began taking out the stones. When they were all set out, he began to say, "Is that what the life is all about? Is it for this that I put my life in danger and at the mercy of the sea, when in a little while I shall die and take nothing with me out of the world?" He said to his sons, "Empty it all into the sea." As soon as he spoke, they cast the riches into the sea. The sailor was amazed and the conspiracy was frustrated. Well, the common points between these two tales are clear. In both stories, a wealthy merchant goes on a journey by sea accompanied by his sons or servants. Moreover, both stories feature a small box with a precious content. The box attracts the sailor's attention and puts them on the course of criminal intent. Additionally, in these two stories, the object of their desire was thrown into the sea, thereby preventing the would-be criminals from attaining their goal. A further matching details is aridity of the term used for the small box. The subject of the sailor's plot has evoked lexicographical speculations, not only among the readers of rabbinic stories, because people produce different, not very successful etymologies for the word kubion, but also by the readers, by the scholars of by reading the Moschos. It was discussed, for example, by Dufay and Vicon, and they actually proposed an emendation. Actually, the pity is that I haven't brought the emendation, but it's too late. It will be like that. So they proposed. I'm quoting, but the problem, namely by reading, it's in this way: "Ferete ta musikia." Musikia is a rare word, a relatively rare word for the actually. Everyone agrees, we know about it's speaking about. It's about the box. But what's the name of the box? The emendation of these people is that it goes about by the relatively rare word, musikia. However, even already the translator of this book to Latin and the Migneux and the Lampe after him explained the word zikia as a scribal error from bikia. And bikia is much more, actually, it's also some sort of box, but it's, I think, much more fitting word for this meaning that kubion or kobion or bikion or bikia, they are very phonetically closed words. And actually, which brings us to that these stories are quite close, not only on the means of plot or literary genesis, but even on this simple, which is very rare actually to find this thing, on the means of the language. They're using the same relatively rare word, which probably was a part of this spoken language of Roman Palestine, but different scribes changed it in different manners, like it became kubion or kobion in rabbinic work, and it became zikia from bikion in Greek word. So it's not merely the original term, though, that was preserved best in the Book of Moschos. The version of this, but now let us count the similarities are evident, but now let us count the dissimilarities, like difference. The version of the story in Pratum Spirituale shows obvious things of primacy. The story aims to show that the life is worth more than money, and that the clever traveler managed to save his life by derailing the plans of those who would have his money. This storyline is, in all likelihood, is part of prototypical design. Clearly, the tale was not crafted to elucidate the third chapter of Ecclesiastes. Thus, we see that they reuse the plot of in Kohelet Rabbah, in Ecclesiastes Rabbah. For the rabbinic narrator, it was very important to reward his pious hero by compensation for his lost money, thereby imparting to his audience a sense that the local law system could be relied upon. At the same time, it is notable that the story in Lemonarium is not a typical Christian hagiographic story. No glorification of pious monks or ascetics is in evidence. This is likely a widespread entertaining narrative with picaresque elements mobilized for the needs of Christian narrator. Like if we will remind the words of Chadwick, it's much more unusual than didactic. Also, as we seen above, the story in Lemonarium in Pratum Spirituale appears more original than the one in Kohelet Rabbah. We should not assume that the latter was borrowed from the Christian source. In general, in fact, I would caution against the linear models of interaction effect, preferring to alternative model of shared narrative milieu. Thus, I propose that these two literary works drew their stories from a living, shared narrative milieu of their time, and in light of the textual parallel, the common culture that lies behind these texts and creates these stories can be detected. The writings of John Moschos were probably known only to his monastic brethren. I rule out the possibility that the editor of Kohelet Rabbah read the works of John Moschos. Actually, I already told it. So this was my first example. And if you don't have any questions about this example, I can go to the second one. Okay. Yeah, please.
If you ask for questions,
yeah, I'm always asking questions.
I would like to pose just one.
Just a second.
You mentioned the word Sikya at one side, and on the other Bikya as a variation for it, as proposed by Lampe. And then you compare also to Kopion or Kopin. The analogy that comes to mind for me is the English word coffin, actually. I don't know exactly how it derives, perhaps from some Middle Latin source. We should ask our specialists in antique languages in this regard, but a coffin and Kopien is, to my mind, quite
sounds close
to each other.
I have to admit that I don't know the etymology of coven in English. It could be checked, but the Latin translation is a Renaissance translation. We don't have ancient, and he translated. I wrote it actually down. What was his translation? But something different, not coven. Minier capsulas.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know if I can add something to this. Investigation.
Well, and another point, perhaps a minor point, in this text also shows up a word like pilgos.
Which is also Greek
word. This is to be derived from pelagos.
Of course.
From the Greek
Yes.
original.
Yes, of course.
And do we have any idea why is not the more prominent word yam used in this context? If we have
difficult, all these, the stories narrated about the sea voyages, they are full with Greek words.
Yeah.
The Daniel Sperber even dedicated to this language studies a certain book. He named it Nautica Talmudica, and he brought all this dictionary of all these navigation terms. They are from Greek.
Thanks a lot.
Now we're going to. Now we're going to our second example, which now we still dealing with small items, and now it's not a box. Now it's a fish, but also the fish could be fulfilled with some precious content, and it's what happened here. And actually, it's quite similar to the previous one, but a little bit different. By the way, I'm not, if it's your first encounter with rabbinic literature, this rabbinic stories, this story that we read now, it's actually not a typical, even if you like in the terms of impression or sense or taste. It's not a typical rabbinic story. Typical rabbinic story usually short as this story, but it's a whimsical story. It's very often ironic. It has some meaning, some controversial meaning. This story is not a top of rabbinic narration, but it's very interesting, and it was chosen not because it's a wonderful story, but because the comparative reading of this story is very illuminating. So the same about this story. This story is rather a very poor story, but let us see. It's on the again from the Ecclesiastes Rabbah. It is also on a very famous verse from Ecclesiastes 3, a time to seek. A time to seek, no, sorry, I'm reading again. So this is probably age. I'm become a little bit senile. You are witnesses about that. I'm not numbered the pages, but we will find out. So our next example is from Ecclesiastes Rabbah 11, and it's also quite a famous verse. We immediately going to this story. Yes, a story about about enigmatic verse. Interesting how you understand this verse, which is in original language, "Shlach lach mecha al pnei hamayim," send bread upon the waters, and it's actually not very clear what the waters and bread are doing together. And actually, the Biblists usually saying that it's about the irrigation of the field, but the rabbis understood it's about the water is the sea. A story about a man who throw one loaf of bread into the Great Sea. Great Sea is the Mediterranean Sea every day. One day he bought a fish, opening it, found a treasure, another version, a precious stone within it. They say to him, "This is a man who has a loaf of bread which caused him success." And they proclaimed concerning him, "Sending bread upon the waters." And it's rather a little, if maybe it's a joke, yeah, because nobody expecting from you to take your bread, to take your Morgenbrot and to cast it into the sea. There is not a big deal, not a big deal of piousness in this deed. So, in this story, the puzzling verse from Ecclesiastes was read not as a metaphor, but as an order to perform a ritual. The plot of the tale is hard to make sense of. The narrator does not explain why the man threw the bread into the sea, despite the fact that it is not the custom of pious men to do such a thing. Even more, someone say, because it's like distorting the food, and the food could be given to the poor people. Perhaps the narrator wished to convey that one may reap great reward for an act, even if it appears foolish in the eyes of a beholder. Clearly, the story in Ecclesiastes Rabbah appears in its secondary context, that is, was brought from some other text. The story was not devised to illustrate the verse from Ecclesiastes, but rather attracted the attention of Kohelet Rabbah editor. And I have to mention here, and it's known to the scholars of rabbinic literature, but it must be mentioned here, that the Ecclesiastes Rabbah has this tendency to bring something to every verse. Usually these typical rabbinic anthologies, they're skipping verses, because not every verse is deserved to be interpreted. Not every verse is used. But there's only two books in all the corpora of rabbinic literature, Kohelet Rabbah and Song of Song Rabbah, where these passages brought to every verse. So, and this is very short passage. So he brought this, it's an editorial activity. He brought this verse, and the story but it's a first appearance of this plot in rabbinic literature, because story appears afterwards in other later compilations, but we are interested in the 7th, as I told, 6th, 7th century, and parallels with Moschos, and this is what we are finding in the Moschos book. In this Moschos related story, he heard from a woman named Maria, on the Greek island of Samos, who told him a tale of Christian woman of Nisbis in Babylonia. And it's a very interesting attribution, I would say. Moschos, who came to land of Israel from Damascus, met on the Greek island a certain lady, and this lady told him a story about another lady in Nisbis, near the Babylon, actually on the border between Roman Empire and Babylonia, city that these two empires always were quarreling on to whom it belongs. Which I think is very illuminating in this case, and in the previous case, the peculiar attribution. We can see there a collector who hearing stories from different people and recording them in his travelogue, in his blog. They possessed, so the story about some couple, they possessed 50 milliarisia, and one day the husband said to his wife, let us lend out that money and get some advantage from it, from withdrawing at little time we are going to spend it all. The wife answered, if you insist on lending this money, come, lend it to the God of Christians. So the man is pagan. His wife is probably like a neophyte, a Christian neophyte. He says to her, well, where is the God of Christians, so we can lend it to him? She said, I will show you. Not only shall you not lose your money, but it shall even earn interest for you, and the capital shall be doubled. He said to her, come on then, show me, and we will lend it to him. It's a long story, so I will summer the middle. The woman takes her husband to the church of Nisbis, where he gives his money to the poor. 3 months later, unable to meet his own expenses, the husband returns to the church, where he finds a coin on the floor. The wife sends him to buy food. He buys bread, wine, and fish. And when he was opened the fish, he found within a precious stone. He sells the gem for 300 milliarisi. I don't know how to pronounce it. Next, we read this continuation of this story. Filled with wonder on the goodness of God, she said to him, O husband, see how good and generous and affluent is the God of Christians. Look how he has merely returned to you this 50 milliards lent him together with interest, but only in a few days he has given you the capital multiplied by 6. The end actually is expected they both become ardent Christians, and everything is clear. So, now, but of course, and I think even all you know, that both of them using not something invented by them. It's a very, very ancient motif known in the story of literature as a motif of Polycrates ring, and actually we finding this story. It's an ancient story about the treasure in the stomach of the fish, mentioned first time in the histories of Herodotus in the third book, 5th century BCE, and actually it's probably this is what interesting in this Nisbe's attribution. It's mentioned by him, by Herodotus, as an Oriental story, and the story appears in Kalidasa, in the Indian book Kalidasa's The Recognition of Sakuntala, which is much more ancient, and from there probably this motive, we have this migrating motive. Thus, the motive of the precious stone miraculously found in the stomach of fish is a universal migrating motive. However, it was not listed in classical Palestinian literature until quite late. In Kohelet Rabbah, the motive is embedded in a genuine Palestinian narrative. The artificiality of the appearance of the precious stone in the fish stomach in Kohelet Rabbah attests less the continuity of the existence of the motif in Palestinian storytelling than its arrival from another narrative milieu. Even in this case, however, the occurrence of the motif in Kohelet Rabbah are much less well integrated in the work, in the story, than in story told by Moschos. So now this is two small boxes, two small items that I want to bring from these two books. And now my concluding remarks. I have analyzed two parallel traditions, parallels between Kohelet Rabbah and the Lemonarium. One of them is a proper parallel, the two stories about a box thrown into the sea and clearly descended from a common prototype. And the Christian version is the primary. My assumption is based not only on the similarity of numerous plot elements, but also on the verbal echoes of the Greek prototype. The second parallel is an example of common motive, namely a single plot item, the treasure in the stomach of the fish. The motive came from the ancient Orient to the Mediterranean basin earlier, but around the same time it was borrowed by two storytellers, the Christian and the rabbi. The clumsiness of the plot of Kohelet Rabbah is evident. The much elaborated version in Christian ontology, by contrast, seems to indicate that Kohelet Rabbah is dependent on the Christian story. Thus, despite the differences between two examples discussed above, while the first has many plot components in common, and the second only one, they are complementary. My search in the small boxes of late antique rabbinic and Christian narrative then has yielded a find. The proximity of two literary traditions can be assumed because of these two parallels. Considering the textual parallels has afforded us a glimpse of the common culture that lies behind the texts and shapes these stories. I would actually, maybe I will to cut this long conclusion short, that I want to, like you probably all using this famous word of work of Curtius about topoi, about this topos invention of Curtius, who found that stories, middle-aged Latin stories, unconsciously preserving elements of ancient Greco-Roman stories, which I want to propose here that contra the influential paradigm, I want to see rabbinic and Christian stories as preserving topoi not Christian and not rabbinic, but from the general culture, from the is what I would find in this shared cultural, shared narrative milieu. Because narrators, like all the people, they always telling the stories, culture is telling the stories. Stories are always made from the same materials, but they are different. Every narrator will build his story from the typical elements, but for the different purposes. What I want to show here that actually before Moschos and before Kohelet Rabbah, it exists this shared narrative milieu, and this narrative milieu is as a sea, like everyone using this Mediterranean Sea. people from the Greek part and people from the other border, from our border. We always using the water from the sea, but the water taken in our vessels will be different water. And actually the shared narrative milieu is like Mediterranean Sea. It's something that was before and probably will remain after, and we usually tending not to evaluate it, not to give to this enough attention, and I want to bring it to your attention. Yeah, it was what I want to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, we can leave it over there. I think we have some time, space and energy left for any questions from the audience. Just a moment.
Thank you very much for your very interesting contribution. My Russian is better as English, but I try.
My too.
Now, I have an idea about the parallel theological parallel with Ark of Noah, Tibote, in this box of narratives. The Christian context for a rabbinic or biblical motif topos in Christian context is always very has a parallels to Ark of Noah Sea. And the didactic issue could be what is to keep and not to keep.
I understand.
After the Sintflut, it is
Oh, so you want to see on the background?
About the theological implication or metaphoric of this box, and also to Stiftshütte is in English tabernacle. Yes.
Tabernacle, yeah.
Gebote, Zikia, Zition, Gebote, tabernacle, Ark of Noah.
I see.
This line.
Yeah. Well, I haven't saw it here, because actually, you see, we don't have. I think I never found I never thought about this parallel between the flood and the sea, because flood is usually accepted in rabbinic literature as something extraordinary. It's not a sea. It's like all the world become covered by hot water. You know, according to rabbinic interpretation, the water was not only that all the world was covered by waters, but it was completely very high temperature waters, which killed all the living beings. So I don't think that they have this. When they talking about the sea voyages, they have this like underlying metaphor. They have a Noah story in their mind, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm trying to do it, like I'm trying to make a taxonomic list of all these sea voyages stories and to compare it with Christian ones. And actually what I found like a biblical parallel, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's a Jonah's story. There you can prove it. You can even saw the verbal echoes of the biblical story. But for me, it's rather difficult to see the parallel between Noah's story and the rabbinic sea voyages story. Which I see in this story difficult. What usually happened in sea voyages stories of this kind, of Jonah's story, like in Jonah's story, God will show His presence. Usually not in the direct manner, but someday divine providence will appear here. You don't have divine providence here. It's mostly like whimsical tricks of the hero rescued him. Not that the God came from above to rescue him. So I don't see this parallel, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, concerning the first story, I still have another idea.
Yeah.
Although I'm not sure whether it is
this one
useful for interpretation, but at least in the Christian context, you could perhaps read the story as following. We are told that people under pressure or under threat are wise enough to throw away their treasures into the sea, and thereby they gain life in a way.
Right.
And could it be interpreted that way, that we say it's a metaphor to abandon even life itself, the earthly life, I mean, in order to gain the eternal life under certain circumstances?
Interesting.
I don't know, but it could be that the story is brought into such a context by the author himself.
But you see, this is the oldest story. It doesn't have any this morality as you propose. So interesting. Once again, for my imagination, I haven't thought about this. Maybe some preacher who used this story used it in this manner, as you saying. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it's intentionally is here in this narration by narrator himself. But I think it's very illuminating that here they have some values that we, in a manner of speaking, you can understand this value. Life is much more expensive or much important than the money. So through the money, which we don't have is in rabbinic story, because this is the reason why I'm thinking that rabbinic story is a secondary to this story, because they somehow, like you see, you can see all this. They calling to nowadays it's fanfic or something like that, or like Tarantino movies, that you have to bring a reward to some suffering people, and it's already the feature of something secondary. It's not because like to give the money back to the hero. Yeah.
Anybody from the outside who wishes for a microphone?
I can give it.
I'm trying to understand a little bit more clearly how one goes about trying to discern how this common pool of narratives or story elements at some far, far remote future, past, looked like, and how we can figure out which elements that, at least with regard to the first story, or first two elements you compared, it seems pretty clear to me that they have something in common with one another. I'm not so convinced to say, I would say this one did not take it from the other. I don't want to have to say anything about who took it from whom, but it seems rather likely that someone could have first taken it and the other one could have taken it from that place. Unless we have other narratives in other texts that also have this element contained in there. So if we have clear cases of stories being very, very close to one another, and we can say something about one text was there earlier and one text was there later, how can we go back to say, no, they have nothing in common with one another, they took it from a pool of narratives that somehow came about, and we don't know how, and we don't know where it comes from. So maybe we can do that, but I don't know how we can do that or how we can argue for being allowed to do so.
I see what you mean. You're right that actually the influential paradigm is something much more solid. You have Christian parallel. You have Christian text. You have rabbinic text. You don't have any other text. So decide who is the primary, who is the secondary, and then to say who. But I think that in this is an oversimplification of the picture, because we have these two voices. These two voices, once were, I believe, I cannot prove it, but I believe that these voices belongs to some sort of chorus, some sort of polyphonic picture where there were the other voices. Then I think methodologically will be much more truthful to say we don't know who took with whom. I can say who is primary. I can say who is secondary. I cannot say who took from whom. Therefore, I will assume the presence of the narrative milieu till maybe we will find much more text, and then maybe it will be clear. Because who knows? Maybe in all these, 15 volumes of Patrologia Greca of Minia, we will find any other story, which I still wasn't able to find. But you were completely right, and it's what sort of notes that I received from this educated readers of my paper, but I insisted on this explanation, yes.
It makes sense. It's definitely one way that's possible that one can go, but my question was also a little bit in the direction of to go, how do I know whether to go with your model or to go with the evidence that is there? I have two stories, they relate, I can say something about their temporal relationship to one another, therefore for now the evidence base is such that I should say the one derives from the other or has been influenced by the other. I would be happy to leave it as an open question.
Mm-hmm. No, but you're asking why to prefer my paradigm and not influential paradigm?
I would ask that question.
Because I think that we don't have what we have actually. We don't know a lot about the past, but we know that the culture existed. These cultures existed in the same, on the means of space and times. So if we will go in this direction, we will assume that the cultural exchange happened. And then we can allow ourselves to reconstruct much more vivid situation of the cultures living together, and despite to be hostile to each other, they still exchanging items. Why they exchanging items? Because these items were existed in this area before these two cultures accepted this style form or river began the story of the river with each other. Mm-hmm. It's my answer to this debate which has happened in the Jewish studies and Christian studies about the departure of the ways, which is a little bit, from my point of view, a little bit scholastic and unnecessary paradigm. If you are assuming the common cultural background, you don't have to talk about the departure of ways or unity of the ways.
So you can leave it as a space where they are continuing to interact, have always and will always, and it doesn't make much sense to talk about a departure.
Right.
Would you go with that?
There is no right.
Okay.
I think there is no in any sense to talk about the departure or unity of the ways.
So let me ask you a little bit further. Would you understand that to be the basis of transcultural studies?
Right, indeed.
So that it's not a directed relationship, or you're not interested in the direction of a relationship so much as you are simply satisfied with observing that there are interactions.
Yes, I want to see the synchronicity of these cultures,
Okay.
not the diachronic development.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then another bit, perhaps. Thanks. Well, I think, or I suppose that I got your view, and nevertheless I would like to ask another question in context with it. You used the word primacy for the story variation, and I would like to hear something about the criteria of primacy in this context. If you say there is interaction between several cultural circles in a way, and they bring about variant stories, mostly independently of each other, then you could ask whether a term like primacy is useful at all.
In the manner of speaking, you are completely right. But you see, I'm a philologist in the beginning. I came from the textual studies. And it's very natural for me, if I'm comparing the texts, like manuscripts, you do have a primacy and secondarity. But the rules of comparison, they are the same. If you're going from the texts, from the manuscripts to the what do you call in German, the high critique. So what I'm using these words like in LTD. You know, it's not completely primacy, because as I told, these variants, they are like last appearance of these traditions, and traditions probably were existed before. So this is a so-called primacy, but I don't know which term you would use in my... No, because, you know, other word you will take about original and less original, but it's even more problematic term, because you don't have any original. So when you say primacy and secondarity, you mean from on this line, like I begin the count from here.
Yeah. So it's more a technical term.
Yeah, it's more technical term than the...
Very well. I propose that we clap hands again.
It's okay. We will.
No. And thank you very much.
Thank you for having me here.
For your enlightening presentation and for sustaining the questions we have formulated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. And if I caused to some attention to these rather marginal works that you can read, I would be very happy, because it's should be more attention should be given to this text.
And we would very much like to engage these questions with you again, maybe not in 10 years, so that your next visit would be much, much sooner than that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.